Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Dining with the Damned, where we talk about criminals who have been sentenced to die. We discuss their lives and how they ended up on death row, and then I show you and taste their last meal before execution. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. I'm listening to all of your advice and I'm working on my marketing skills. So please make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. It helps so much. And you can also join my Patreon. We have a big goal that we're trying to reach there, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. Well, I can promise you this. We have not seen a last meal request like we're going to see today. It is by far the strangest last meal request I've ever covered on this channel. So stay tuned to see, the weirdest one yet. James Edward Smith was born on October 15th, 1952 in Tarrant County, Texas. We have basically no information on his childhood, about his education or his upbringing. James is one of the many people whose life story will be lost to the ages. All we will ever know about him are the crimes that he committed and the fact that he was executed for those crimes. At one point, James got into reading tarot cards when he was working in New Orleans, and he seemed to view tarot cards as the cold, hard truth. It wasn't a hobby for him or something he used for a guide in his life. He truly believed that what the cards said was the absolute truth. And I think this goes to show what people have said about him is true. He was functioning at a lower mental capacity than most. He also got very into voodoo, although people who know about voodoo said James never really quite got the religion. He would take bits and pieces and kind of mix and match the parts he liked. So it doesn't sound like he was a very knowledgeable practitioner. But his belief in voodoo does come into play for his last meal. For a while, James worked as a taxi cab driver in Houston, and he seemed to do okay at that job, but he complained that he wasn't paid enough, and friends said he was known to steal anything he could get his hands on. In broad daylight on March 7th, 1983, James walked into the office building that housed Union Life Insurance Company. He was wearing a ski mask and he was carrying a gun. He walked up to the teller window where employee Deborah Renee Wilson was counting money from the cash drawer. James lifted his gun and pointed it at Deborah. He then cocked it and told Deborah to give him all of the money. Deborah panicked, which isn't usually the best thing to do, and she ran behind a filing cabinet. One of the men who worked in the insurance office, he was actually the regional manager, Larry Rohus, was standing by and watching all of this occur. When Deborah ran behind the filing cabinet, Larry walked to the window, gathered up all of the money Deborah had been counting, and gave it to James. Larry then turned and started to walk towards Deborah, but James yelled at him to come back to the window. Larry Rohus could obviously see something in James Edward Smith's eyes that told him this was not going to end well, and Larry began to plead for his life. James Edward Smith then callously shot Larry in the upper left side of his chest, and Larry fell to the ground. At the time he was shot, Larry was trying to take off his rings and his watch to give them to James, but James shot him anyway. There was absolutely no reason for this shooting. Larry had given James exactly what he'd asked for, but there were some things about James that Larry didn't know. James did have a very low IQ, and he suffered with mental disabilities. He is not someone who should have had a gun. Frankly, he's not someone who should have been out of care most of the time. But we all know our mental health system is probably the worst in the first world. And because of this, people like James are allowed to not only live without care, but to obtain weapons as well. After James shot Larry, he ran from the office building, but another office worker chased him. James then ran into a field. Seeing what was happening, a nearby crew of men working on the roads ran to help. James then opened fire on all of the men who were chasing him, and it's kind of a miracle that none of them were shot. He must have run out of ammo because the office worker and the road crew got close enough to tackle James, and that's just what they did. So with 5 or 6 men on top of him, James Edward Smith was done for. There was nowhere for him to go. He was caught. A police detective who just happened to be driving by saw the struggle, and he joined in and then handcuffed James. This is one of those reprehensible crimes where somebody goes in and does something they shouldn't be doing. Everyone complies and gives them exactly what they want, and they end up hurt or dead anyways. I mean, there is no such thing as a good robbery, but at least there are some criminals who, when they get what they want, they leave. Larry Rohus was rushed to the hospital, and doctors did everything they could to try and save him, but he died about 2 hours after the shooting. James Edward Smith was arrested and put on trial for the murder of Larry Rohus. On one day of the trial, during jury selection, James Edward Smith tried to escape. He actually managed to get out of the courtroom and out of the courthouse, which is something I just can't really wrap my head around. How in a secure location, like a courthouse, with bailiffs standing around, there are guards, there are metal detectors in some of them, and even were back then, how do you let somebody who's going to trial for murder get away? I mean, the Ted Bundy story is wild enough, but you can at least understand that because he was in the library. He was acting as his own attorney. So they were letting him sit in the library to read some legal books before that part of the trial started. I still don't think he should have been left alone. But, as you probably know, he jumped out of the courthouse windows and ran and got away. I mean, it just kind of makes you wonder what goes through these people's heads. They've got this dangerous person and they're not keeping an eye on him. A small army of bailiffs and officers chased James down, and he was recaptured a few blocks from the courthouse. The jury was selected, and the trial went ahead, and on April 5th, 1984, James was found guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. He immediately began filing appeals, and those lasted several years. But his final appeal in November of 1987 was denied. James then decided to waive the last set of death row appeals in order to speed up his execution. The date was set for May 11th, 1988. James gave an interview to a reporter in which he is quoted as saying, "Life is a temporary situation. The spirit moves on. Death is like eating a prune in the morning. It's a natural function." Say what now? I mean, I get the prune reference, but what does regularity have to do with death? I don't know. He lost me. He lost me on that one. On the day of his execution, James' mother filed paperwork asking the Supreme Court to spare his life. She filed an appeal stating her son was mentally incompetent. The court agreed to hear the appeal and granted the stay of execution, but ultimately nothing changed. 2 years later, James Edward Smith was scheduled to die for a second time. Just like before, he denied the appeals process, saying he was ready to die and be reincarnated. His mother, however, was not ready for him to go, and she filed another request for stay of execution. This time, the court denied it. On June 26, 1990, James Edward Smith was moved to the death watch cell. He was given time to sit with some relatives, and he requested, but did not receive his last meal, which I am still going to show you, the meal. And then he was taken to the death chamber. James was asked if he would like to say any last words. He said, "I am an innocent man," and then he recited the Krishna blessing. The lethal cocktail of drugs were administered, and at 12:31 a.m., James Edward Smith was pronounced dead. Not a very long story, not a lot of details, but I really wanted to cover this case because of his last meal request. Hang on, you are not going to believe this. For his last meal, James Edward Smith requested a clump of dirt. Doesn't that look appetizing? Why on earth would someone request a clump of dirt for their last meal? Let me try and explain. James didn't actually want any old clump of dirt. He wanted Riakunda dirt. Now, I looked up Riakunda dirt and I got different definitions. Some websites said that Riakunda dirt is the dirt from a freshly dug grave. It's especially powerful in voodoo, actually hoodoo, and they're different things, if the grave of the person was considered to be a magical or a powerful person. Other sites I researched said that Riakunda dirt is the same thing as gopher dust. Gopher dust is powder. If you've seen The Serpent and the Rainbow or movies that incorporate voodoo, they'll take a handful of powder and blow it into the person's face, and then they become like a zombie, or a spell is on them, they're hexed or whatever. But only a couple of websites said that. Most of them said that really what he was after was the dirt from a freshly dug grave. What was he gonna do with it? He was gonna eat it. James' belief was if he ingested this clump of Riakunda dirt, that his spirit would be able to move on quicker through the process of death, and he would be reincarnated more quickly and into someone more powerful than he had been in his previous life. That was his belief. Shockingly, dirt is not on the list of prison-approved foods, and so his request was denied. James ended up eating a few spoonfuls of plain yogurt, but that was it. I mean, I always taste the last meal requests on here. I guess I kind of have to taste this, don't I? I'm nervous because you know what I do here. I talk about people that eat weird things and do weird things, and I always think of that kid that licked the snail, that horrible story of that kid who he licked a snail or ate a snail on a dare and it killed him, but it didn't kill him right off, it killed him like years later. Like, what if there's something in here? Because this is like potting soil. I'm just gonna taste it a little, I have to. It doesn't taste like anything. It smells like potting soil, but it doesn't taste like anything. Got gritty, gritty dirt teeth. I told you guys this was a weird one. A clump of dirt. And remember Victor Fager and his olive with the pit in it? He wanted a single olive with a pit in it, so when he was buried, his body would decompose and then the olive pit would grow an olive tree as a sign of peace. That was a pretty weird request, but I think this tops it, yeah. Never quite seen anything like this before on our channel here, have we? We've seen some kind of gross meals. I still can't get over the guy that wanted hominy and cottage cheese, and was it like stewed prunes or something? I mean, oh, but even that was better than this. This takes the cake. No, cake. That would have been a better choice. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Damned. Please like the video if you liked the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to support me. You can also join my Patreon. Patreon is pretty much keeping the channel alive at this point, and we have an end goal there. The end goal on Patreon is to donate money to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because there's no money to test it. We want to help with that. We want to help with that so we can close those cold cases, and we want to help with that so we can get the perpetrator's DNA in the system, because there may be other crimes that they're linked to. So it's a really important cause. If you want to give a couple of bucks a month, that's fine with me. I sure appreciate you being here and spending a part of your day with me. Your support means the world to me. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.